So, for all the bookworms in the audience today, I'm sitting with the biggest reader that I know. Nick Hutchison is the founder of Book Thinkers, and he reviews thousands of books, and I really don't think that's an exaggeration. He takes his knowledge from books to create amazing content and inspire others. However, he is not done there. Nick is coming out with his own book, Rise of the Reader, which is available November 1st, 2023. I'm super excited for it. This book is all about how to master your reading habits and apply what you learn, which some of us struggle with a lot. Reading is such a crucial aspect to our success here, so I'm excited to have you on, Nick. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, Matt, I'm excited for the opportunity. Can I ask you the first question today?
Let's do it.
What is your favorite book of all time?
Oh, that's a great question. I really struggle to answer this because I'm like always asking the person, "Oh, what do you want to read in a book?" Like I'll kind of tailor it from there. I would say my favorite is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I just love Goggins, his story, and it's just all about discipline, which I love. And that was really the book that really sparked my strong habit for reading almost every day.
Stay Hard. Yeah, I love
Yes,
that
sir,
book.
stay hard.
I've probably listened to that audiobook 3 or 4 times already. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really enjoy David's message. And yeah, I mean, it's such a great message because the average person in their 20s and 30s today is just kind of going with the flow. They don't love
Yep.
what they do. They don't know how to define success. And therefore they live a mediocre life. And David sort of slaps you in the face and says, wake up. Life
Exactly.
can be great. Like, go out there and do something. So what a great book. I'm happy
Yeah.
that you picked that one.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an awesome one. So Nick, I want to start off by asking you about like your reading habit, because if someone looks at your page or they look at Book Thinkers, they're going to see you with so many books in your hand, like you're reading all the time. How did this habit start for you?
Well, when I was growing up, I was not much of a reader. And I was sort of more of the athlete stereotype, not much of the academic. And that behavior continued through my college experience until I took an internship going into my senior year. And I took this internship. It was at a local software company. I had about an hour commute each way. And my boss, Kyle, quickly recognized that I had sort of this unfulfilled potential. Like I wasn't maximizing my time. I was kind of lazy. I didn't think it was cool to read or listen to podcasts. So he said, hey, step one, why don't you check out some business podcasts? So he introduced me to a few and I started listening to them on the way to and from this internship. And so I'm crushing podcasts. And eventually I realized that so many of the successful people, and we could talk about what that means in a minute, but so many of the successful people that I was listening to, they were giving at least some credit for their success to the books that they were reading. And so I just kind of had this moment reinforced by Kyle, my boss at the time. Like if I deliberately chose not to read these books, and I was deliberately choosing to live under my potential. And as a competitive and also pretty insecure guy at the time, I went to my local Barnes and Noble, grabbed a bunch of books, and the rest is history. And so I just realized that these books condense decades of valuable information, of lived experience into days of reading. And with precision and intention, you can solve problem after problem after problem or develop skill after skill after skill and get closer to who you're potentially going to become. And so that's kind of how it all started for me.
That's awesome. What were some of the first few books you picked up from Barnes and Noble?
Book number one, well, I grabbed about 10 books on that first trip, but book number one that I decided to read was Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And then I moved right into Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki. I read The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey, The Richest Man in Babylon by George S. Clason. And there's a theme here, right? Personal
Yeah.
finance.
Mhm.
It was a subject that I had never really learned about. I mean, the US public education system does not teach us the importance of financial literacy. So I just kind of had aha moment after aha moment. And I went from financially illiterate to leading conversations about personal finance and investing when I went back to school. And so it was just like, what other area of my life can I apply this
Mhm.
to?
That's awesome. I'm really excited to ask you this because so many people struggle with it. I always get questions of, hey, I'm trying to read a book. Like I recommend everyone to read, and I try to give book recommendations. And people say to me, hey, I'm trying to read, but I just can't get past, one chapter. I can't do 10 pages a day. It's just not engaging me. What is your advice for that? Or like, how did you get past that? Was it ever a struggle for you to like actually pick up a book and finish it?
Well, I think to start, you need to be emotionally connected to the subject that you're reading about. And so I kind of go in 3 different buckets when I talk about this with somebody who's just starting out. Bucket number one is there somebody that you idolize, like somebody that you really want to be like? And have they written a book or had a book written about them? So if you can start in the biography or autobiography space, those books read like a movie and you're already interested in learning more about that person, so you'll stay engaged.
Yeah.
Bucket number two is there a problem that you're dealing with on a daily basis that you could solve by reading about how somebody else overcame that problem? And I'll typically throw out the following equation. If you're dealing with a problem on a daily basis, over the next 30 years, you will experience that pain 11,000 times. So spend $20 and a few hours reading about how somebody else overcame it, and don't experience it the next 10,950 times if you could solve it in 50 days. And then bucket number three is skill acquisition. So what's the difference between where you are today and where you want to be in 5 years? And what skills do you need to acquire to get closer to who that person is? And I think if it's a very specific skill related to maybe a job or a day-to-day passion, that person will stay emotionally connected to it. So those are kind of the three places that I like to start. A couple other things that I'll throw out there. If somebody tells me, hey, Nick, I'm not a reader. I just can't find the time to read. I can't stay in the book. I love to ask the following question. Hey, if I paid you $10,000 to read a book by the end of the month, do you think you could do it? And that same person who just told me they can't read is like, well, I could read 5. So it's not a question of whether or not we can read, but it's a question of whether or not we value the books enough to prioritize them in our calendar. And the last thing I'll kind of wrap up with here is that if you can, instead of trying to find time to read, I recommend replacing a low impact activity like social media or Netflix with reading a great book just for 15 minutes twice a day. That's sort of the best schedule that I think you can do as a start. So replace a little bit of Instagram in the morning and a little bit of Netflix in the evening with reading a great book. If you can replace 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening, that's 30 minutes of reading per day. For somebody who's just starting out and they're emotionally connected, they'll probably read about 20 pages in those 30 minutes. 20 pages, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, that's 100 pages a week. That's a book every 2 weeks or every 2.5 weeks. That's 20 to 26 books over the next 12 months that you can read by replacing a little bit of Instagram and a little bit of Netflix with a great book. And remember, these books serve your future self. But Netflix and Instagram, although they're interesting, they don't serve your future self. Like I can't even remember main characters in shows I watched 3 months ago, so those are some of the things that I recommend.
Yeah, I love that. And it's pretty full circle to the recommendation you got from your internship, saying how valuable books can be and your missed potential by not reading books, because like you said, there's so much knowledge out there and for a very low cost to access what a David Goggins, what an Ed Milet, what a Dale Carnegie would do in certain situations that you might be dealing with or that you want to deal with in the future. Because if you want to scale your business, you want to do bigger things in life, you will have bigger problems. And they're just saying, hey, here's how I dealt with it. Here's how you can prepare for that. So it's great advice from you, just saying, like, if you want to become a higher version of yourself, the books are out there for you. You can just take all that knowledge and not have to experience the pain yourself.
Yeah, we think that our pain is unique, that we're special. But the fact is, about 100 billion people have lived before us, 100 billion. And when you read books like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, you realize that the Emperor of Rome, right, this great philosopher who lived 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, was dealing with the same problems that we deal with today. So again, 100 billion people have lived before us. Millions of them have written books, and thousands of those books detail how somebody just like you overcame the same problem that you're facing. And so, yes, you can learn by your own experience, but I think the experience of other people is even better because you can learn without going through the pain and all of the time that it takes to learn through trial and error. So it's like the greatest life hack and shortcut to becoming successful, again, using that word. Life doesn't have to be so hard. It's easy. Other people have figured it out and then they detailed it for you. And all you have to do is spend a little bit of time and a little bit of money and then implement what they recommend.
It's like the cheat codes in a video game. Just steal it, copy and paste. It's awesome.
Yes.
I want to ask you, what if you have a book that we've all been there that you just don't really enjoy? You get a couple chapters in, you're just like, oh man, I'm dreading the next 200 pages. What do you do in that situation? Do you put it away? Do you say, I have to finish this book? I know sometimes you have to be reviewing books and everything, but what would you recommend for someone to do in that situation?
If you're not being paid to review the book, which most people won't be that are listening or watching today, I have two things to say. Number one is that when I first started, I was trying to aim for a certain number of books per year, right?
Yeah.
Which it was the wrong metric. We'll talk about that in a minute. But to me, reading a book meant every word of every page. So even if I was reading a book that I found out wasn't actually about the subject I thought it was, or isn't a very good book, or maybe it wasn't even done very well, like there's misspellings and errors and formatting and stuff, which does happen with books, I'd read the whole thing. And eventually I realized that I was optimizing for the wrong goal, right? I'm trying to improve my life, not read a certain number of books per year. That's a vanity metric. And so I heard Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss on a podcast once talk about something called the rule of 100. So you take the number 100, you subtract your age, and that's how many pages you have to read. So I'm 29. 100 minus 29 is 71. I have to read 71 pages before I can put down a book. The older you get, the less you have to read. If I was 50, I'd only have to read 50 pages because the wiser you'll get as you age. And so I think that's a good rule. Like if somebody in the audience is looking for a system or a rule to kind of offload the decision making to somebody else, that's a good place to start. Life is too short to read a bad book. Life is too short to read a book that's not going to fulfill the original intention that you had for it. And so, yeah, I say put down the bad books.
Yeah, I like that. It's a really good rule of thumb there. I want you to expand more on the goal of X amount of books per year because I'm guilty of that. And I kind of point out to myself a few times, like maybe that's not the right goal. Maybe I should just be doing more quality books or rereading some books. Why is that your mindset?
I do think when somebody is first starting out, it's important to read as much as you can. Read about a wide variety of subjects. Don't worry too much about implementation. We all have a different style. So you'll start to understand how different authors communicate information, and you sort of need to understand first principles thinking, like the basics of how these books work and how you can implement them. And I think the fastest way to make that happen is just to run full speed and read as many books as you can. 52 books, 26 books, 100 books, whatever your goal is, optimize for that when you're first starting. But as you start to get into this industry, as you start to build a business or improve your health or your wealth or your happiness, as you start to define success for yourself and optimize for that instead, it becomes more important to read with precision and intention, solve problems, read about people you admire, and develop skills. And so I think it's a transition that kind of happens slowly over time. And so, yeah, I remember first starting out, like I want to read a book every 2 weeks. Then I want to read a book every week. Then I want to read 2 books a week. Then I started to understand like there are very specific things that I want to solve for in my life. And that's what I should optimize for instead. Maybe that means 1 book on the subject. Maybe that means 10 books on the subject. But I started to optimize for success and what that meant for me. And that meant solving problems and developing skills, not reading 100 books. So that's sort of the evolution. Like if I spent more time thinking about it, I could probably have a better answer or define a better transition point for people. But those are some of the things that I think about.
Awesome. I want to talk about your book a little bit. I feel like this is a great transition into kind of the central theme of the book. I saw a clip of you speaking before, and you asked the audience about the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is a very popular book among personal development, entrepreneurs, and most of the people raised their hands saying they read the book before. You said, how many people can tell me the 7 habits? And it was a much different response. Why is it that we always struggle to retain and apply what we learn from books?
You know, my mentor, Kevin Horsley, he says, only if you can remember information can you truly live it. And that kind of hit home for me. So many people are reading books, it goes one in ear and out the other, and they totally forget what they've read. Sometimes people can't even tell me if they've read a book before. Like, hey, have you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad? I don't know. I think so. So if we're spending all this time and money, we might as well get the most out of these books. So that was a problem that I had started to deal with. And at first I thought, oh, maybe you can only retain so much from these books. Like maybe there's only enough room to remember something from 25 books at a time. And every time you read another one, it pushes another one out of your memory. But that's not true. Kevin taught me that you could read for thousands of years and still have room to store that information. So it's a question of strategy, frameworks, organization. And I started to learn how to retain and implement more information effectively. So over the years, I've built this community, Book Thinkers. We have about 150,000 followers on Instagram, another 50,000 followers on the other platforms. We do about 1 million impressions a month organically. So I interact with a lot of readers. I attend conferences, we get a bunch of DMs, and that's been continuing for the last couple of years. Over the last couple of years, I've received some of the same questions hundreds of times. How do I choose the right book? How do I start a reading habit? Kind of like we've talked about already. How do I take effective notes? What do I do with my notes? How do I retain more? How do I implement more? How do I actually change my behavior instead of just think about it? And so I decided, rather than answering everybody with a quick voice note or typing something out or jumping on individual Zoom calls, like, maybe I should write a book on this subject, because I knew that what I do today works. Like, I'm living my dream life. I am successful. But when I first started 10 years ago, I certainly didn't do the same things I'm doing today. So there is some value that I can offer. Like, I'm 1 or 2 steps ahead of that 20-year-old version myself. And there are some things that I wish he was doing that I'm doing today. So I started to document my own behavior. That was kind of step number 1. Like, what the heck? Like, observe my own behavior from a third-party perspective. What the heck does Nick Hutchison do? Because I'd never really taken the time to actually define the strategies or frameworks. I just sort of iterated over time. And it was actually a tough process for me to kind of define everything. It's definitely not a strong skill set. I am not a writer. But I knew that because I was receiving the same questions so many times, there was a genuine need for this information to be out there. So it took me about 3 years. And over the last 3 years, I researched a bunch of note-taking strategies, retention strategies, implementation strategies, and I also observed my own behavior, and I shoved everything into this book. So Rise of the Reader, Strategies for Mastering Your Reading Habits and Applying What You Learn. Actually, have a little early copy right here. It'll teach everybody who decides to read and implement it everything about reading and implementation. So it's sort of a book about books. And I mean, we can go into some specific strategies if you'd like, but that's the story of why I decided to write this book. As we've already talked about, I do believe that the right book at the right time can change your life if it is implemented correctly. Mm-hmm. And there is a strategy that works. I've used it. It took me less than 10 years to build my dream life and become successful. And it's available to anybody else. And it pains me when people read these books like 7 Habits and they don't implement anything and nothing changes. And that's a bummer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would love to get a little sneak peek, if you will, of, let's say, 2 different types of readers that would read your book. Let's say number 1 is someone who wants to get into reading. They don't really have much background. They just want to learn about how to read books better when they start doing it. What would they get out of it? And what about someone who's been reading for 5 to 10 years? They read 20 books a year. They just want to become a better reader and retain more from these books.
So if you're just starting out, this should be the first book that you read. I really believe that, because it will help you get more from every book that you read after it, right? So Rise of the Reader is book number 1 for everybody. An example of a strategy that I teach is how to choose the right book and how to navigate this world of self-help, because there are a lot of snake oil salesmen. There are a lot of people who, they're not writing to create a genuine impact. They're writing to make money. And so I talk about how to navigate those downsides of the self-help industry as somebody who's first entering this space. One of the things that I talk about is looking at Amazon reviews before you decide to purchase a book. I say ditch all of the 5-star reviews and ditch all of the 1 and 2-star reviews. I think the 3 and 4-star reviews, that's where the magic happens. Those reviews are written from a place of logic, not emotion. And so if you can dive into the 3 and 4-star reviews before deciding to purchase a book, you'll get the honest take. These are people who have read the book. They'll tell you, here's what I expected versus here's what I was delivered. They'll talk a little bit about the author. Hey, this book had some good information, but I felt like I was being upsold into a course the entire time. Only read it if you need XYZ, right? So that's a tip for somebody who's just starting out. I do believe that most people in this industry are out there documenting decades of their own experience and just putting value out there for people, but not every author is like that. So trust, but verify. Check out the 3 and 4-star reviews, check out their social media, get in the comment section, understand who you're reading before you decide to read it. That would be an example of a strategy that I think would be more useful for somebody first starting out. For somebody who's been reading for 5 to 10 years, I think still most of the book would apply to them. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes I'll meet somebody and I'll say, hey, Matt, what are you reading? And you'll tell me and I'll say, why? And you'll be like, what do you mean why? I'm like, well, why are you reading the book that you're reading? I think we need to read with intention. And what I mean by that is I think we need to set a SMART goal for each book that we read. So I'll give an example. One of the popular books right now is $100 Million Leads by Alex Hormozi. Everybody's reading it in the world of business. Alex is on top of the world. He's a business author. And his book, $100 Million Leads, is all about building lead mechanisms within a service-based business. Great. Well, unfortunately, so many people are reading the book without intention. They're reading the book just hoping that it's going to change their life. Instead, set a SMART goal. So a SMART goal, SMART is an acronym a lot of us are familiar with, but I'll just run through it real quick. S stands for specific. Your goal needs to be specific. M stands for measurable. What's not being measured cannot be managed. So you need to set a goal and know whether or not the book achieved that goal. A stands for attainable. You need to set a realistic goal, something that you can achieve so that you don't become overwhelmed. R stands for relevant. You need to be emotionally connected to it, just like we talked about in the beginning of today's episode. You need to solve a problem or develop a skill, and you need to know why you're doing that. And then T, SMART, stands for time bound. So you need to give yourself a deadline and leverage Parkinson's law. Okay, a SMART goal for $100 Million Leads by Alex Hormozi would sound something like this. Find and implement at least 2 lead generation strategies for my business book thinkers by the end of October, because my business, quite frankly, stinks at lead generation. And we're only leveraging one of the 5 buckets that Alex talks about. So there's an opportunity cost to not reading and implementing the book for my business, like real tangible dollars. So I'll take that intention and I'll write it on the inside cover of the book. Find and implement at least 2 lead generation strategies for my business book thinkers by the end of October. And I will review it each and every time I read a few pages of that book, so that my brain is told what to filter for. These books are exciting. There's all sorts of things that you can implement, but not everything is related to your intention. So you want to filter everything else out. And your brain has this RAS function, the reticular activating system, that can filter for specific information if you tell it what to filter for. And so now when I'm reading through the book, okay, boom, there's something. Let me highlight that real quick. I continue reading because, again, reading and note-taking, 2 separate activities. You don't want to multitask. Okay, here's something else I could take action on. Let me highlight that. When I'm done with the book, there might be 10 or 15 different strategies that I could take action on. So I'll write them all down. Again, separate activity. After I'm done with the book, I'll go all the way back through. I'll write all of these potential actions down, and I'll look at the list and I'll say, what 20% of these could lead to 80% of the change that I'm looking for? Not every action is created equal. Some of them have more leverage and they're easier to implement. What 20% of these can I take action on? And that's all I'll choose to implement. Remember, the goal is to find and implement at least 2 strategies. If you do more than 2, 3, 4 strategies, you'll probably stunt yourself. You won't take action. So my goal is not to implement as much as possible. It's to take reasonable, attainable action from the book. And then I know whether or not $100 Million Leads served its purpose. My goal wasn't to learn about lead generation. It was to take action. Napoleon Hill says action is the real measure of intelligence. That's how you become intelligent. You take action. So that's something that I think somebody who's been reading for 5 to 10 years could benefit from, because I've never met a person who reads with that much intention. Even people that have been reading for 30 or 40 years and have big businesses, they're like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. So I hope that one was helpful.
Yeah, that is golden right there. Because like you said, so many people read just to read it, and I'm guilty of that too. Like I just want to find a good book and breeze through it and just get a few key points. But we often forget a lot of things, and we often don't apply most things. So what good does it do if you could just recall a quote or something if you're not actually living and applying it? So that's something I'm going to start doing, because if you write down an intention, that makes it so much more easy to get through the book with more purpose and actually apply, what you actually are learning in the book. So I love that. It's great advice right there. And like you said, like everybody can benefit from that. So it's really good. How do you define success for the book here? What's your goal?
Action. So I think success for the book is fulfilling that intention that you set, the SMART goal that you set. So if you found and implemented two lead generation strategies into your business, the book was successful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll give you an example of what these books can do. Alex's one of his previous books, $100 Million Offers, added 6 figures of additional revenue to my business within a couple of months of reading it.
Wow.
I didn't implement the whole book. I just implemented a couple things from it. A $20 book in a few hours of my time led to over $100,000 of additional revenue within a few months. That's success, right? Mm-hmm. That's me taking action on the book, going through all of the exercises, using Alex's brain in my business, and magic happens. So let's say you're reading Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. Again, amazing book on mindset and grit and staying hard. But that's all people say most of the time. They're not like, oh, I use his accountability mirror techniques, or, I used the motivation to start running. They're just like, oh, awesome book, right? Mm-hmm. So again, set a goal. Find and implement at least 2 mindset shifts that create more energy and momentum in my business or my life by the end of the month. And now when you're going through, you're like, oh, accountability mirror, I should implement that. Or interesting, he goes out there and runs after never having run before 100 miles. Like, I'll go out there and run 2 miles, or whatever the case is. Like, take action on what David teaches you. Don't just go, oh, now I'm a wolf amongst wolves or whatever. Like, that doesn't do anything for you. It just sounds cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, where can everybody find your book when it comes out November 1st?
Well, I'll say this, and I will answer that question. If anybody wants a custom book recommendation from me, because they heard what we talked about for finding a book, but they're still not really sure where to go, DM me on Instagram @BookThinkers. Tell me about a problem you have, a skill that you want to develop, something in between, and I'll make a book recommendation for you. Awesome. And hold you accountable to reading it. I'll follow up a couple of times to see if you're reading the book.
Love that.
And right in our link, right in the bio of Book Thinkers on Instagram, you can find links to the book.
Perfect. Yeah. Please make sure you take Nick up on that, because that's a great offer right there. Well, Nick, we talked about the book and defining success for reading and everything. How do you define success in life? What does success mean to you?
Success means enjoying the passage of time. That's what it means to me. Enjoying the passage of time, doing more of what I love, less of what I don't love. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of variables that kind of sit under that, but I think sometimes we overcomplicate. Now, when I was first starting in this world of books, success meant financial success. But nowadays, when I meet somebody who has $100 million in the bank, but they're overweight and their family hates them, that's not success, right? I think it's a good balance between health, wealth, relationships, and happiness, mental health. To me, that's enjoying the passage of time, because if any one of those 4 pillars is out of whack, or out of however you would describe that, that's not success to me. You've got to be balanced. You have to enjoy your time. And that's all I optimize for. So that's what it means to me, enjoying the passage of time.
Great definition. Who is someone that inspires you, and why? It could be someone you know or don't know, but who's an inspiration to you?
Tim Ferriss is a big inspiration for me. Tim Ferriss is the author of one of my favorite books, The 4-Hour Workweek, as well as a number of other books, and the host of The Tim Ferriss Show, which is a podcast. Tim is a human guinea pig. He's always trying crazy things related to health and biohacking, related to business, delegation, automation, elimination. He's always prioritizing the highest impact activities in his life. Tim's a human. He's had a lot of relationship issues and some mental health issues. So I wouldn't say Tim is the definition of success by any stretch, but he's somebody that I admire as far as health and business are concerned. I've learned a lot from him, and he's very humble and curious, and those are very admirable qualities to me.
Awesome. I love that. Well, I want to get and pick your brain on some book recommendations right now. So, for the audience, obviously, this podcast is called Define Success. Anyone listening to this, they want to be successful, younger demographic of individuals. Could you give us maybe a top 5 books that would fit this audience?
Sure. The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy is a book that teaches you that small steps in the right direction over a long period of time will lead to disproportionately positive outcomes. Slow and steady wins the race. No matter how many times you read Aesop's fable, The Tortoise and the Hare, the tortoise always wins. And when you're young and you're hungry and you're in the middle of this hustle culture, I think you can become overwhelmed and therefore don't take any action. And so that book teaches you to take small, manageable action, 1% improvements every single day. I recommend The Go-Giver by Bob Berg and John David Mann. There are 5 core lessons in that book. My favorite is that there is a reciprocal relationship between giving and receiving. When I was in my early 20s, I was out there just trying to take. And then I overcorrected. I was just trying to give. But you want to create space for both. You want to invite people to give, and then you want to give as much as you can back. So that's a really important book for me. I recommend The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. We've talked a little bit about it, but I read that book working a normal 9-to-5, location dependent. And I used the frameworks in that book to at first become location independent, but still work that same job, and then build my business on the side and design a life that was uniquely fulfilling to me. So that's a really important one. Book number 4 is called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. I think it's a book that's really important for young people to read. The author, Bronnie Ware, was an is an end-of-life palliative care nurse, meaning she would spend the last couple of days or maybe weeks, maybe a month before somebody would pass away. And she would help them sort of transition out of life. And she would spend a lot of time talking to people, learning their life story. And she realized that, unfortunately, almost everybody dies with a lot of regret. Mm-hmm. And the number one regret was people choosing to live a life based on other people's expectations of them instead of their own. Society's expectations, like fit inside the box and you'll get criticized if you don't. Their parents' expectations, that sort of thing. And so that book reinforces that I don't want to die with regret. Like, I'm out here making the most of my time while I have the energy to do it. I'm still in my 20s, and you can create an amazing life for yourself and live without regret. And then I'll throw one more out there. So book number 5, I'd like to recommend The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman. It's a book that I read every single day for a couple of years. Stoicism is a very actionable philosophy, and it's about real life. And again, you'll realize that people have been facing the same problems for 2,000 years, the same questions, and that book can help you navigate them. There's a lot of really cool Stoic aphorisms, and you can learn from people like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and Epictetus, and really interesting book. And it's only 1 page a day. So those are the 5 things that I'll recommend today.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Nick. Outside of reading and business, you love to travel, very avid traveler. I want to kind of pick your brain on that. How has this enhanced your life, your success? What does traveling do for you?
Travel is the second greatest form of personal development, in my opinion, outside of reading and implementing books. It's very focused on action. You're out there moving and grooving. So when I travel, I embrace discomfort. I love traveling to countries where I don't speak the primary language, where I'm not familiar with the food or the currency. And as a result, that always puts me in crazy situations. And I'm forced to find a solution and figure it out. So yeah, I just, to be brief, my now wife and I have traveled to 25 different countries over the last 5 or 6 years, sometimes for up to 3 months at a time. And I'm constantly learning, growing, improving. There's a line in Vagabonding by Rolf Potts, which is a book about travel, where he says you can find entire continents within yourself, like new areas of exploration when you travel. And I really enjoy that.
That's super cool. Well, before we let you go, I want to ask for one piece of advice to someone listening to this that they want to be successful. Maybe they want to start reading. They're just lost on the direction that they're heading. They need some advice to get back on the right track. What would you leave that person with?
Read Rise of the Reader by Nick Hutchison.
Hmm.
Outside of that, I would say optimize for enjoying the passage of time. Do more of what you enjoy and less of what you don't enjoy. Read the books that I recommended because they'll help you sort of step into a mindset where you care less about what other people think and you care more about what you think. Self-care is really important. And then again, slow and steady wins the race. Book Thinkers, my business, was an unsuccessful agency for 5 straight years. But I kept a full-time job while I was building it so that I didn't have a financial scarcity mindset. And I could
Hmm.
still enjoy my time while building it. I had full-time employees and was doing over 6 figures in revenue in the business while I still had a full-time job. That's how much I wanted to minimize risk. So, I lived at home with my parents for a big portion of that. I'm interviewing Grant Cardone and all of these big names, and I'm living in my parents' house. Like, who cares what society thinks?
Yeah.
Just do what you enjoy and become successful that way. That's my piece of advice.
I love that, man. Well, thank you so much. Everyone, go make sure you check out Book Thinkers on Instagram. They have great content. You guys can find books pretty much every single day on, topics that you enjoy and the review of them. Check out Nick's work and check out the new book, Rise of the Reader. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the opportunity.